Damascus, Syria, February 12, 2008. A silver Mitsubishi Pajero sits parked on a quiet residential street in the Kafr Sousa neighborhood. Inside the vehicle, hidden in the spare tire compartment, is enough Semtex plastic explosive to level a small building. At exactly 10:45 p.m., a man in his mid-40s walks toward the car, pulling keys from his pocket. He's returning from a reception at the Iranian Cultural Center, where he spent the evening celebrating the anniversary of Iran's Islamic Revolution. He opens the door, slides into the driver's seat, and reaches for the ignition. He never gets to turn the key. The explosion is so powerful, it vaporizes the vehicle instantly, sending a fireball 50 feet into the air and scattering debris across 3 city blocks. The man is Imad Mughnieh, Hezbollah's military commander and the most wanted terrorist in the world, and he just became the victim of one of the most sophisticated assassination operations in modern intelligence history. This is the story of how Mossad spent 25 years hunting a ghost, how they finally tracked him to Damascus, and how they executed an operation so precise that it killed their target without harming a single bystander in one of the most heavily surveilled cities in the Middle East. But to understand why this operation mattered so much, why Israel was willing to risk everything to eliminate this one man, we need to go back to where Imad Mughnieh's legend began. Back to Beirut in the 1980s, when a young Shia militant discovered he had a talent for violence that would change the course of Middle Eastern history. Imad was born in 1962 in the southern suburbs of Beirut, an area known as the Dahieh. This wasn't wealthy Beirut, with its French cafes and Mediterranean beaches. This was poor Beirut, crowded with Shia refugees who had fled southern Lebanon to escape Israeli military operations and intercommunal violence. The Dahieh was a place where children grew up fast, where sectarian identity mattered more than individual dreams, and where militant groups recruited teenagers who had nothing to lose. Imad's family was religious, but not particularly political initially. His father worked various jobs to support the family. His mother raised the children in a traditional household. But Lebanon in the 1970s didn't allow for political neutrality. The civil war that erupted in 1975 forced everyone to choose sides. Christians versus Muslims, leftists versus rightists, Palestinians versus Lebanese nationalists. Violence became the primary language of political expression. By his mid-teens, Imad had joined Fatah, the largest Palestinian militant faction operating in Lebanon. Yasser Arafat's organization controlled large parts of South Lebanon and the refugee camps around Beirut, using Lebanese territory to launch attacks against Israel. Young Lebanese Shia men like Imad joined Palestinian groups because they offered training, weapons, and a sense of purpose that regular life couldn't provide. Imad learned the basics in Palestinian training camps: how to handle AK-47 rifles, how to plant explosives, how to move through urban terrain without being detected. But he was learning something more important than technical skills. He was learning how to think strategically about violence. Most young militants were impulsive, emotional, eager to fight, but lacking discipline. Imad was different. He watched, listened, analyzed. He understood that successful operations required planning, patience, and cold calculation. In 1982, everything changed. Israel invaded Lebanon in June, sending tanks and troops north to push Palestinian militants away from the border. The operation was supposed to be quick and limited. Instead, it turned into an 18-year occupation that transformed Lebanese politics completely. Israeli forces reached Beirut, laid siege to the city, and forced the evacuation of Palestinian leadership and fighters to Tunisia and other Arab countries. The invasion radicalized Lebanon's Shia population. They had tolerated Palestinian armed presence in their villages reluctantly, but Israeli occupation was something else entirely. Foreign troops occupying Lebanese territory, setting up checkpoints, conducting raids, killing civilians in military operations. The humiliation and anger created exactly the conditions for resistance movements to flourish. Hezbollah emerged from this environment in 1982, formed by Lebanese Shia clerics with support from Iran's Revolutionary Guard. Iran had just overthrown the Shah and established an Islamic Republic. They saw Lebanon as an opportunity to export their revolution, to create a proxy force that could fight Israel and establish Iranian influence in the Arab world. They sent advisors, money, and weapons to Lebanon, helping to train and organize young Shia men who wanted to resist Israeli occupation. Imad Mughniyeh joined Hezbollah in its earliest days, bringing his experience from Fatah and his natural aptitude for military operations. He quickly distinguished himself from other fighters. While most Hezbollah recruits were motivated primarily by religious ideology or nationalist resistance, Imad combined ideological commitment with operational creativity. He didn't just want to fight Israelis, he wanted to hurt them in ways that would force them to leave Lebanon entirely. His first major operation came in 1983, and it changed everything. On April 18th, a suicide bomber drove a van loaded with explosives into the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. The blast killed 63 people, including 17 Americans, among them the entire CIA Middle East Intelligence Directorate. It was the deadliest attack on American intelligence personnel in history at that point. Intelligence reports later attributed the planning to Imad Mughniyeh, though he was only 20 years old at the time. The operation demonstrated sophistication that went beyond typical militant attacks. The timing was perfect, hitting the embassy during working hours when maximum personnel were present. The explosive load was massive, carefully calculated to bring down a reinforced building, and the psychological impact was devastating, proving that American installations weren't safe even in allied countries. 6 months later came the operation that would define Imad's legacy and change U.S. foreign policy. On October 23, 1983, at 6:22 a.m., 2 suicide truck bombs detonated simultaneously at 2 locations in Beirut. The first hit the U.S. Marine barracks at Beirut International Airport, killing 241 American servicemen. The second hit the French military headquarters nearby, killing 58 French paratroopers. The explosions were enormous. The bomb that hit the Marine barracks was later estimated to be equivalent to 12,000 pounds of TNT. It lifted the 4-story building off its foundation and collapsed it completely. Some Marines were literally blown out of their beds and thrown hundreds of feet. The force of the blast was felt across Beirut, windows shattering miles away, people waking to what they thought was an earthquake. Intelligence analysts concluded that Imad Mughniyeh had planned and coordinated both attacks. He was 21 years old. The operational complexity was staggering. Coordinating 2 simultaneous suicide bombings, ensuring the trucks reached their targets without being stopped at checkpoints, timing the detonations for maximum casualties. This wasn't amateur work. This was professional military planning executed with precision. The political impact was exactly what Imad had calculated. American public opinion turned sharply against the Lebanon deployment. Parents of dead Marines demanded answers. Politicians questioned why American troops were dying in a civil war that had nothing to do with U.S. national security. Within months, President Reagan ordered the withdrawal of all American forces from Lebanon. France withdrew as well. The message was clear: spectacular. Violence could achieve what conventional military operations could not. It could force superpowers to retreat. For Imad Mughniyeh, the success of the 1983 bombings established his reputation within Hezbollah and among Iran's Revolutionary Guard. He was promoted rapidly, given command of Hezbollah's external security organization, essentially their intelligence and special operations branch. This position gave him resources, freedom to operate, and protection from rivals within the organization who might have resented his rapid rise. Throughout the 1980s, Imad orchestrated a campaign of kidnappings targeting Western civilians in Lebanon: journalists, teachers, businessmen, diplomats, anyone who could be used as leverage against Western governments. The hostages were held in secret locations, moved frequently to prevent rescue attempts, and used in negotiations to pressure the US and European countries on various issues. One victim was William Buckley, the CIA station chief in Beirut. He was kidnapped in March 1984, held in brutal conditions, and tortured for information about American intelligence operations. Buckley died in captivity in 1985, though his death wasn't confirmed until years later. The CIA considered his kidnapping and death one of the agency's greatest failures, a humiliation that demonstrated how vulnerable even senior intelligence officers were to determined adversaries. Imad was also implicated in the hijacking of TWA Flight 847 in June 1985. The plane was traveling from Athens to Rome when two men stormed the cockpit shortly after takeoff, forcing the pilots to fly to Beirut. Over 17 days, the hijackers held 153 passengers and crew hostage, moving the plane between Beirut and Algiers multiple times. During the ordeal, they singled out U.S. Navy diver Robert Stetham. They beat him severely, tortured him while other passengers listened to his screams, then shot him in the head and dumped his body on the tarmac. He was 23 years old. Witnesses reported seeing a man matching Imad's description on the ground in Beirut during the hijacking, apparently coordinating with the hijackers and directing the negotiations. By the late 1980s, Imad Mughnieh was one of the most wanted men in the world. The FBI placed him on their most wanted terrorists list, with a reward of $5 million for information leading to his capture. The CIA had a dedicated team tracking him, and Mossad had authorization to eliminate him on sight, anywhere, under any circumstances. But nobody could find him. Imad had become a ghost, operating from the shadows, planning operations without ever exposing himself to surveillance or attack. He appeared in no photographs after the early 1980s. He gave no interviews, made no public appearances, avoided all situations where he might be identified or targeted. His security protocols were extreme, even by intelligence standards. He used multiple safe houses in Beirut's Dahieh, never staying in one location more than a few nights. He communicated through intermediaries and written messages, avoiding phones and any electronic device that could be traced. He changed his appearance regularly, growing and shaving his beard, gaining and losing weight, wearing different styles of glasses or contacts. He traveled using forged documents and false identities when he had to leave Lebanon. Israeli intelligence tried everything to locate him. They recruited informants inside Hezbollah, but Imad's security was so tight that even senior members of the organization didn't know his whereabouts. They monitored communications, but Imad never used phones or radios that could be intercepted. They tracked his family members, hoping he would visit them, but he stayed away, understanding that family represented his greatest vulnerability. In 1992 and 1994, Imad orchestrated two massive bombing attacks in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The first targeted the Israeli embassy, killing 29 people. The second destroyed a Jewish community center, killing 85 people and injuring hundreds more. Both operations demonstrated Hezbollah's global reach, their ability to plan and execute attacks on the other side of the world, far from their base in Lebanon. The Buenos Aires bombings intensified Israeli determination to eliminate Imad. He wasn't just another militant commander. He was a strategic threat, someone capable of planning and executing operations anywhere, someone whose operational creativity and willingness to kill civilians made him uniquely dangerous. Israeli leadership authorized unlimited resources for his capture or killing. Mossad made him their #1 priority, above even Hamas leadership or other Hezbollah commanders. But the years passed without success. Through the 1990s and into the 2000s, Imad continued operating, planning attacks, managing Hezbollah's external operations, training new generations of fighters and bomb makers. He was living proof that operational, discipline and security protocols could defeat even the most capable intelligence agencies. As long as he never made mistakes, never exposed himself, never created patterns that could be exploited, he remained invulnerable. Then, around 2006, something changed. Intelligence intercepts and information from sources inside Hezbollah suggested that Imad had relocated to Damascus, Syria. He hadn't left Lebanon because of Israeli pressure, but because of internal Hezbollah politics. Imad's power and independence had created tensions with other leaders who resented his autonomy. Moving to Damascus, where he could operate under Syrian and Iranian protection, gave him distance from these rivalries, while allowing him to continue his work. Damascus was both easier and harder for Israeli operations. Easier because Syria, despite being an enemy state, was more penetrable than Hezbollah's strongholds in South Beirut. Syrian security services could be infiltrated, Syrian officials could be bribed or turned, and the city itself was more open than the tight-knit Shia neighborhoods where Hezbollah controlled everything. Harder because conducting an operation in Syria's capital carried enormous risks. Getting caught would mean captured operatives, international scandal, and possible military retaliation. Mossad began building intelligence on Imad's life in Damascus, where he lived, where he worked, where he socialized, who he met with, what his security arrangements looked like. This took years. Operatives had to be inserted into Syria under deep cover. Sources had to be recruited within Syrian government circles. Surveillance had to be established without alerting Syrian counterintelligence. What emerged was a picture of a man who remained extremely cautious but had developed certain patterns. He lived in the Kafr Susa neighborhood, an upscale area popular with government officials and foreign diplomats. He maintained multiple residences, but used one apartment more regularly than others. He traveled in an armored vehicle with a security detail, but the detail was small, usually just a driver and 1 or 2 bodyguards. He attended meetings at the Iranian Cultural Center and occasionally at Syrian intelligence headquarters. Most importantly, he had started making regular public appearances at the Iranian Cultural Center for certain events. Not frequent appearances, maybe a few times per year, but predictable enough that Israeli intelligence could anticipate when he might be present. These events usually involved Iranian diplomats and Hezbollah officials based in Damascus, celebrations of Iranian holidays, or commemorations of religious occasions. Mossad analysts identified a vulnerability. After these events at the Iranian Cultural Center, Imad would return to his vehicle and drive himself back to his apartment. He didn't use a driver for this short trip, apparently comfortable navigating familiar streets in his own neighborhood. The drive took about 5 minutes, following a route he had used multiple times, and critically, he parked the vehicle on the street rather than in a secured garage. The decision was made in late 2007. Mossad would assassinate Imad Mughnieh using a car bomb, detonating it remotely when he was alone in the vehicle and away from civilians. The operation would be called Drink of Death, a reference to the justice they intended to deliver for his decades of terrorism. Planning took months. The first challenge was access to the vehicle. Imad drove a silver Mitsubishi Pajero, a popular SUV in the Middle East, but his specific vehicle was armored and modified for security. Mossad needed to plant explosives inside the vehicle in a way that would defeat the armor and ensure his death, while minimizing the blast radius to avoid killing bystanders. The solution was to plant the bomb in the spare tire compartment, located on the back of the vehicle. This position was ideal because it was inside the armored shell, meaning the blast would be directed inward toward the passenger compartment rather than outward. It also meant less explosive was needed, reducing the risk to surrounding buildings and civilians, while still ensuring a lethal blast for anyone inside the vehicle. But getting access to plant the bomb was the operational challenge. Imad's vehicle was kept under guard when parked near his residence. Syrian security services monitored the area. Hezbollah operatives provided additional security. Any attempt to approach the vehicle openly would be noticed immediately. Mossad's solution required technical sophistication. They developed a device that looked exactly like the spare tire mounted on the back of Imad's Pajero. Same brand, same model, same wear patterns, but hollowed out to contain plastic explosives, a detonator, and a remote triggering system. The device was designed to replace Imad's actual spare tire without anyone noticing the switch. Getting the bomb tire into position required a combination of human intelligence and technical operation. Mossad recruited a Syrian asset, someone with legitimate reasons to be in the Kafr Susa neighborhood and access to the street where Imad's vehicle was often parked. The asset's identity remains classified, but investigators believe it was someone working in a service capacity, possibly automotive repair or security, someone whose presence near the vehicle wouldn't trigger suspicion. Over several weeks in late 2007 and early 2008, surveillance teams tracked Imad's movements, documenting when he used the vehicle, where he parked, and what security arrangements were in place. They identified specific times when the vehicle was parked on the street with minimal surveillance, usually during daytime hours when Imad was inside attending meetings. The bomb tire was brought into Syria in pieces, smuggled across the border from Lebanon or through other routes, then assembled in a safe house in Damascus. The explosives were high-grade Semtex, a plastic explosive favored by intelligence agencies because it's stable, powerful, and difficult to detect. The detonator was sophisticated, designed to be triggered by a specific radio signal that wouldn't accidentally activate from random electromagnetic interference. On a date in January 2008, the operation moved into execution phase. The Syrian asset identified an opportunity. Imad's vehicle was parked on the street in Kafr Susa during daytime while he attended a meeting. The surveillance team confirmed that security presence was minimal, just a single guard positioned at a distance who was distracted by his phone. The asset approached the vehicle with tools and the bomb tire, moving quickly but not running, maintaining the appearance of someone performing routine maintenance. He removed the original spare tire and mounted the bomb tire in its place, securing it with the same bolts and fasteners. The entire process took less than 3 minutes. Then he walked away, leaving the original tire nearby as if he planned to return for it, just another piece of street debris in a busy city. Mossad now had a live explosive device attached to their target's vehicle. The next challenge was detonation timing. They needed Imad to be alone in the vehicle. They needed him to be in a location where the explosion wouldn't kill bystanders, and they needed to trigger the device remotely from a safe distance. The triggering mechanism required someone on the ground in Damascus with line of sight to the vehicle. Radio-controlled detonators have limited range and can be blocked by buildings or other obstacles. The operative needed to be close enough to ensure the signal would reach the device, but far enough away to avoid being caught in the blast or identified by investigators afterward. Mossad inserted a small team into Damascus in early February 2008. They entered Syria separately, using forged passports, checking into different hotels, and maintaining cover identities as European businessmen or tourists. Each carried components of the triggering device, designed to look innocuous if searched. Small electronic parts that could be explained as phone chargers, computer accessories, or other ordinary items. The team assembled the triggering device in a rented apartment, then began surveillance of Imad's routine. They needed to identify the perfect moment for detonation, when he would be in the vehicle alone, driving on a street without heavy foot traffic, or nearby buildings full of civilians. Intelligence indicated that Imad would attend a reception at the Iranian Cultural Center on February 12th, celebrating the anniversary of Iran's Islamic Revolution. The event would run from evening until around 10 p.m., after which guests would depart. Based on previous patterns, Imad would likely drive himself home afterward, following his usual route through Kafr Susa. On February 12th, the surveillance team confirmed Imad's presence at the Iranian Cultural Center. They watched as guests arrived, documenting who attended and where they parked. Imad's silver Pajero was parked on a side street, the bomb tire clearly visible on the back of the vehicle. The hours passed slowly. The team maintained positions around the area, staying mobile to avoid suspicion, communicating through encrypted messages. They had identified the ideal location for detonation, a stretch of street in Kafr Susa that was residential but not densely populated, with apartment buildings set back from the road. Detonating there would minimize collateral damage while ensuring Imad couldn't survive the blast. At approximately 10:30 p.m., guests began leaving the reception. The surveillance team watched as Imad said goodbyes to Iranian officials and Hezbollah colleagues, then walked to his vehicle. He was alone, no security detail accompanying him for this short drive. He opened the door, got into the driver's seat, and started the engine. The vehicle pulled away from the cultural center, heading toward Kafr Susa. The surveillance team tracked his route, confirming he was following the expected path. They communicated his position to the operative holding the triggering device, a small radio transmitter disguised as a cell phone. Imad's vehicle entered the predetermined zone. The street was clear of pedestrians. No cars were parked immediately adjacent. The apartment buildings had lights on, people were home, but the street level was empty. The conditions were as perfect as they would ever be. The operative pressed the trigger. A radio signal transmitted to the detonator hidden in the bomb tire. The explosive detonated with massive force. The blast was so powerful it vaporized the vehicle instantly, the armored hull offering no protection against explosives detonating from inside. A fireball erupted into the night sky, debris scattering across the street and into nearby buildings. Imad Mughnieh died instantly, his body torn apart by the explosion. The blast was massive enough that investigators later had difficulty recovering identifiable remains. Windows in surrounding buildings shattered from the shockwave. Car alarms throughout the neighborhood started wailing. People rushed to their balconies and windows, staring at the flames consuming what remained of the vehicle. But remarkably, no bystanders were killed. Some nearby residents suffered minor injuries from flying glass, and several parked cars were damaged by debris, but the blast had been directed mostly inward and upward, exactly as Israeli planners had intended. The precision was extraordinary. In a dense urban environment, they had detonated a massive explosion that killed only their target. The Mossad operatives began extracting immediately. They had planned escape routes days earlier, identifying multiple paths out of Damascus, depending on where they were when the explosion occurred. They moved quickly, but without panic, blending into the chaos as curious residents flooded into streets to see what had happened. Syrian security forces responded within minutes, but they were focused on the blast site, not on identifying people leaving the area. The operatives reached their safe houses, collected their belongings, and began the journey out of Syria. Some crossed into Lebanon, others into Jordan or Turkey. Within 24 hours, all were safely out of the country. Back at the blast site, Syrian investigators began piecing together what had happened. The vehicle was completely destroyed, burned wreckage scattered across the street. The bomb had clearly been inside the vehicle, not planted underneath or thrown at it. That meant someone had accessed the vehicle to plant explosives, which implied either a major security failure or inside help. Syrian officials initially considered the possibility of an internal assassination. Imad had enemies within Syrian intelligence who resented his independence and his close ties to Iran. But as they examined the wreckage and interviewed witnesses, the sophistication of the operation became clear. The bomb had been expertly placed and timed. The detonation had occurred at precisely the moment when Imad was alone and in a location that minimized collateral damage. This wasn't the work of amateurs or rivals settling scores. This was a professional intelligence operation. Hezbollah leadership announced Imad's death within hours, confirming his identity and vowing revenge against Israel. Hassan Nasrallah, Hezbollah's Secretary General, gave a televised speech calling Imad a martyr and promising that his death would be avenged. Thousands of Hezbollah supporters gathered in Beirut for his funeral, carrying his photograph and chanting slogans about resistance. Israel neither confirmed nor denied responsibility, maintaining the standard policy of ambiguity around assassinations. Israeli officials made no public statements about the operation, but privately, Israeli leadership celebrated one of Mossad's greatest successes. They had eliminated a target who had evaded them for 25 years, someone responsible for killing more Americans than any other terrorist before September 11th. The operation's precision impressed intelligence agencies worldwide, planting a bomb in a target's vehicle without detection, tracking his movements in a hostile capital, detonating the device at the exact moment that minimized civilian casualties while ensuring the target's death. These were extraordinary achievements that demonstrated technical capability and operational discipline at the highest level. The Damascus operation became a case study in intelligence training programs: how to conduct long-term surveillance in hostile territory, how to recruit and manage assets who provide access to targets, how to design explosive devices that achieve specific tactical effects, how to coordinate teams operating under deep cover in cities where discovery means capture or death. For Hezbollah, Imad's death was devastating. He had been their most capable military commander, the architect of operations that had defined their reputation. His death created a leadership vacuum that took years to fill. Hezbollah promoted deputies to replace him, but none possessed his combination of operational creativity, international connections, and institutional knowledge. The organization also faced uncomfortable questions about security. How had Israeli intelligence penetrated Damascus so thoroughly? Who had provided access to Imad's vehicle? Could there be other compromises they didn't know about? These questions bred paranoia and internal investigations that disrupted operations and eroded trust within the organization. Iran's Revolutionary Guard, which had protected and supported Imad for decades, was equally humiliated. They had provided him with security, safe houses, and resources, yet Israeli intelligence had still reached him in the heart of Damascus, a city where Iranian influence was supposedly dominant. The failure prompted reviews of Iranian security protocols and changes in how they protected high-value assets. Syria's government faced international criticism for allowing a terrorist to operate openly in their capital. The United States and European countries issued statements condemning Syria's support for Hezbollah and noting that Imad's presence in Damascus proved Syrian complicity in terrorism. President Bashar al-Assad defended his government, claiming they had no prior knowledge of Imad's presence and that Israel had violated Syrian sovereignty by conducting an assassination operation on Syrian soil. But the diplomatic complaints meant little in practical terms. Israel had achieved a strategic objective, eliminating someone who posed direct threats to Israeli security. The operational success outweighed the diplomatic complications, and importantly, the operation sent a message to other Israeli enemies. No location was safe. No amount of security guaranteed protection. Patient intelligence work combined with technical capability could reach anyone, anywhere. The operatives who planned and executed the Damascus operation received commendations within Mossad, though their names and identities remain classified. They had spent years building the intelligence foundation that made the operation possible, recruiting sources, establishing surveillance, identifying patterns and vulnerabilities. The actual assassination took minutes, but the preparation took years. This ratio is typical of successful intelligence operations. Most of the work happens long before the action, creating conditions where the final operation can be executed quickly and cleanly. Imad's assassination looked simple in retrospect. Plant a bomb, wait for the target, detonate remotely. But the simplicity disguised thousands of hours of intelligence work, dozens of operatives involved in various roles, and technical capabilities that took years to develop. The psychological impact on other Hezbollah commanders was significant. If Imad Mughnieh, the most security-conscious operative in the organization, could be tracked and killed despite all his precautions, then no one was truly safe. Other commanders increased their security measures, became more paranoid, reduced their movements and public appearances. This defensive posture limited their operational effectiveness, forcing them to spend resources on security that could otherwise be directed toward planning attacks. This erosion of effectiveness through sustained pressure is a deliberate strategy. Israeli intelligence understands that eliminating individual leaders won't destroy organizations like Hezbollah, but cumulative attrition over years creates organizational degradation. Each assassination forces reorganization, promotes less experienced people, and creates fear and caution that constrains operations. The Damascus operation also demonstrated the evolution of assassination techniques. Earlier operations, like the 1972 response to Munich, relied primarily on gunfire and close-quarters violence. Later operations incorporated more sophisticated methods: poisoning, car bombs triggered by cell phones, remote-controlled devices. Each generation of operations reflected advances in technology and tradecraft. The bomb tire used to kill Imad represented cutting-edge capability in 2008. The explosive device was precisely calibrated to defeat armored vehicles. The triggering mechanism was reliable and secure, activated only by the correct signal. The entire package was designed to look exactly like a genuine spare tire, defeating visual inspection. These technical capabilities required extensive research and development, investments in specialized equipment, and training. For the families of Imad's victims, the assassination brought complicated emotions. Parents of the Marines killed in Beirut in 1983 expressed satisfaction that their son's killer had finally faced justice. But they also noted that his death didn't bring their children back, didn't erase 25 years of grief and loss. The families of Robert Stetham, the Navy diver murdered during the TWA hijacking, released statements thanking intelligence and military personnel who had pursued Imad for decades. But other victims' families, particularly those from the Buenos Aires bombings, expressed frustration that Imad had been killed rather than captured. They wanted him to face trial, to answer for his crimes publicly, to provide information about who had ordered the attacks and who had assisted. His death foreclosed that possibility, closing a chapter without providing the complete accounting that victims' families sought. This tension between justice through elimination and justice through legal process reflects broader debates about counterterrorism strategy. Intelligence agencies and military commanders generally prefer elimination. It's cleaner, faster, and prevents the complications that trials create. But victims and human rights advocates often prefer capture and prosecution, arguing that rule of law matters and that trials provide accountability and closure in ways that assassinations cannot. Israel has consistently chosen elimination over capture when dealing with high-value targets outside its borders. The practical difficulties of capturing someone like Imad in Damascus, transporting him out of Syria without triggering military response, and holding him for trial while facing retaliation attempts, these challenges make assassination the preferred option. Israeli leadership has calculated that the strategic benefits of quick elimination outweigh the moral and legal arguments for capture and trial. The Damascus operation raised minimal international controversy compared to earlier Israeli assassinations. European governments issued pro forma protests about violations of Syrian sovereignty, but their hearts weren't in it. Imad Mughniyeh was responsible for killing hundreds of civilians, including many Europeans. Most Western intelligence services privately congratulated Mossad, even as their governments publicly expressed concern about assassination operations. The United States' reaction was particularly telling. CIA officials had been hunting Imad for decades, viewing him as one of their most wanted targets. When news of his death reached Washington, there was celebration at Langley. CIA Director Michael Hayden later confirmed that American intelligence had been aware of Israeli plans and had provided some level of support, though he declined to specify what form that support took. This cooperation reflected the reality that Israeli and American interests aligned completely on Hezbollah. Both countries viewed the organization as a terrorist group and Iranian proxy. Both had suffered attacks orchestrated by Imad Mughniyeh, and both benefited from his elimination. The operation demonstrated how intelligence cooperation works in practice: shared targets, shared intelligence, and tacit support for operations that serve mutual interests, even when they violate international law or diplomatic norms. Imad's assassination also occurred at a critical moment in regional politics. Iran's nuclear program was advancing rapidly, creating deep concern in Israel and the United States. Hezbollah's arsenal of rockets and missiles had grown substantially with Iranian support. The organization had fought Israel to a stalemate during the 2006 Lebanon War, demonstrating capabilities that threatened Israeli security. In this context, eliminating Imad sent multiple messages. To Hezbollah, that their most protected commanders remained vulnerable. To Iran, that supporting terrorism carried costs. To Syria, that allowing Iranian proxies to operate from their territory made them complicit in terrorism. And to other regional actors, that Israeli intelligence remained capable of conducting operations. Despite facing well-armed and experienced adversaries, the long-term strategic impact of the assassination remains debated. Hezbollah continued operating, conducted attacks, and maintained its military capability. Iran continued supporting the organization with weapons and funding, and the broader Arab-Israeli conflict continued without resolution. Some analysts argue the assassination changed little strategically, eliminating one individual without addressing underlying conflicts driving violence. Others contend that eliminating leaders like Imad has cumulative effects that matter over time. Each assassination forces organizational adaptation, promotes less capable people, and creates periods of reduced effectiveness while new leadership establishes itself. These temporary windows of reduced capability can be exploited through other operations, creating cascading effects that weaken organizations more than any single elimination would suggest. What remains undeniable is that Imad Mughniyeh's death in Damascus represented one of intelligence work's greatest achievements. For 25 years, he had evaded the most capable intelligence agencies in the world. He had operated under conditions of extreme operational security, avoiding every attempt to locate or eliminate him. His tradecraft was nearly perfect, his discipline complete, but nearly perfect wasn't enough. Israeli patience, technical capability, and willingness to take risks eventually identified the small vulnerabilities in his security: the pattern of attending events at the Iranian Cultural Center, the routine of driving himself home afterward, the vehicle parked on the street where it could be accessed. These small exposures, accumulated over time, created the opportunity that Israeli intelligence had waited years to exploit. The operatives who tracked Imad through Damascus carried the satisfaction of completing a mission that had consumed careers. Some had worked on his case for decades, following leads that went nowhere, recruiting sources who provided useful intelligence but never actionable targeting information. The breakthrough that finally enabled the assassination validated years of patient intelligence work, demonstrating that persistence and methodical analysis eventually create opportunities even against the most difficult targets. For Mossad as an institution, the Damascus operation reinforced lessons about long-term intelligence development. The operation succeeded because of investments made years earlier. Sources recruited in Syria who provided access and intelligence, technical capabilities developed through research programs, training that prepared operatives to work under deep cover in hostile environments, coordination with allies who provided support at critical moments. These capabilities don't emerge overnight. They require sustained investment, institutional memory that passes knowledge from one generation of operatives to the next, and political leadership willing to authorize operations that carry significant risks. Israel has built these capabilities over decades, creating an intelligence apparatus that ranks among the world's most effective. The Damascus operation also demonstrated the integration of human intelligence and technical capabilities. The human sources provided access to plant the bomb and intelligence about Imad's routines. The technical capabilities provided the explosive device, the triggering mechanism, and the surveillance equipment that tracked his movements. Neither alone would have been sufficient. Success required combining both into a coordinated operation, where human intelligence enabled technical capabilities and technical capabilities made human intelligence actionable. This integration is characteristic of modern intelligence work. The distinction between human intelligence and technical intelligence has blurred, as operations increasingly require both. Operatives need technical skills to exploit communications and surveillance systems. Technical systems need human intelligence to identify what to target and how to interpret collected information. The most successful operations marry both seamlessly. Imad Mughniyeh's story is ultimately a case study in the limits of individual operational security. He did everything right, according to intelligence tradecraft. He avoided patterns, minimized exposure, maintained strict communications discipline, and operated under layers of security. But he couldn't eliminate risk entirely. He couldn't stop living completely, couldn't avoid all public appearances, couldn't function entirely alone. Those small necessities, the minimal patterns required to exist and operate effectively, created vulnerabilities that patient intelligence work eventually exploited. The lesson is not that operational security doesn't matter, but that perfect security is impossible. Everyone creates patterns, everyone has vulnerabilities, and capable adversaries with unlimited time will eventually identify and exploit them. The operatives who killed Imad Mughniyeh understood this completely. They didn't look for the obvious mistake or the dramatic security failure. They looked for the small, inevitable patterns that anyone operating in the world must create. And when they found those patterns, they built an operation around them, creating the conditions where a precisely placed bomb and a remotely triggered detonation could eliminate one of the most wanted terrorists in the world. 25 years of hunting ended with a flash of light on a Damascus street, a vehicle vaporized, a life ended, and a chapter in the history of Middle Eastern terrorism closed. The operation demonstrated what intelligence agencies can accomplish when given time, resources, and clear objectives, and it sent a message that continues resonating. Israeli enemies can run, can hide, can take every precaution, but eventually, somewhere, patient intelligence work will find them. Watch the next video to see another impossible Mossad operation.